We are so close. 2 more days, my lads. So I really hope you guys jump in. I'm gonna go ahead and give you guys, like I usually do, a couple minutes to get started, get ready in. So in the meantime, like I said, obviously we're not gonna get through all the way on the book. Once we get a little bit later on and we get to near the end, then I'm gonna go ahead and just because we're not gonna get all the way to the end of the book, so I'll let you guys know basically what happens there. So let's see. I believe we stopped to. We were just at the underwater forest. Yes. So 18. 18. So if whoever's here, I see there's two of you. I'm guessing. Let's see. Jerry for sure. Uh, whoever else, feel free. Mention yourself. Introduce yourself down there. So today, 4,000 leagues under the Pacific. By the next morning, November 18th, I had fully recovered from exhaustion of the day before and climbed onto the platform just as the Nautilus's chief officer was uttering his daily sentence. Then it occurred to me that these words referred to the state of the sea, or more specifically, that they meant that there's nothing in sight. The upper reaches of the Crespo Island disappeared during the night. Swallowing up every cover or other prism except for blue rays, the sea reflected the latter in all directions and sported a wondrous indigo tint. Time and again the undulating waves looked like water silk in wide stripes. I was marveling at this magnificent ocean view when Captain Nemo appeared. He didn't seem to notice my presence and started taking a series of celestial sights. When he'd finished his operations, he went down and leaned his elbows on the beacon housing, his eyes straying from the surface of the ocean. Meanwhile, some 20 of the Nautilus's sailors, all husky, energetic fellows, climbed onto the platform. They'd come to pull up the nets left in our wake during the night. These seamen obviously were all of different nationalities, though they all had some European characteristics. If I'm not mistaken, I recognize some Irishmen, some Frenchmen, a few Slavs, a native of either Greece or Crete. Even so, these men were frugal of speech among themselves and used only the peculiar dialect whose origin I could not even guess. Accordingly, I had given up any notion of questioning them. They hauled the nets on board. These were a type of trawl similar to the ones used off the Normandy coast, huge pouches held open by a floating pole and a chain pulled through the lower meshes. Trailing in this way from these iron glove makers, the resulting receptacles scoured the ocean floor and collected all marine items in their path. Diana, hi, I'm so glad you're here. And only like the day before we ended. So we're here until Wednesday. Feel free if you guys have any idea about what you want to, if you want to do anything special on the last class, think about it. Let me know. I still have to read that Doom Eternal review that Freddie wanted me to, so let him know. I'll be happy to do that on the last day of class. So that day they gathered up some unusual specimens of these fish that filled their path. Goosefish, whose comical movements qualify them for the designation clowns, black anglers equipped with red antennas, red-lined triggerfish encircled by little crimson stripes, balloonfish, whose venom is extremely insidious, a couple of olive-colored lampreys, pipefish covered with silver scales, cutlass fish with the electrocuting power of an electric eel or ray, scaly featherbacks, crosswise brown stripes, green codfish, several varieties of goby, and more. A few fish of larger proportions, including a 3-foot barjack with a prominent head, several handsome bonito from the genus Scomber, decked out in the colors of blue and silver, and 3 magnificent tuna, whose high speeds couldn't save them from our trawl. Go for it. Like I said, you guys just let me know whatever you want to do for the last day of class. I'm pretty flexible. I estimate that the cast of this net brought in more than 1,000 pounds of fish. It was a fine catch, but hardly surprising. In essence, those nets stayed in our wake for several hours, incarcerating a whole aquatic world in prisons made of thread. So we were never short of high-quality provisions, which the Nautilus's speed and allure of the electric light could continually replenish. I'm sure he deserved it. These various items from the sea were immediately lowered into the hatch in the direction of storage lockers, some to be eaten fresh, others preserved. After its fishing was done and air supply replenished, I figured that the Nautilus would resume its underwater excursion, and I was all set to go back to my stateroom when Captain Nemo turned to me and said without further preamble, "Look at this ocean, Professor. Does it literally have a life of its own? Doesn't it feel both anger and affection? Last night I went to sleep just as we did, and now it's waking after a peaceful night." No hellos or good mornings for this character. You would have sworn this strange individual was simply continuing a conversation that we'd already started. "See," he went on, "it's awakening under the sun's caress. It's ready to relive its daily existence. What a fascinating field of study lies in our play of the organism. It has a pulse and arteries. It has spasms. I side with the scholarly Commander Maury, who found that its circulation is as real as the blood circulation in animals." I'm sure Captain Nemo didn't expect any response from me, and it seemed pointless to keep hopping in with, "Of course, certainly, and right you are." In actuality, he was talking to himself and taking long pauses between sentences. He was thinking out loud. "Yes," he said, "the ocean has an authentic circulation, and to trigger it, the creator of all things had only to increase its heat, salt, and microscopic animal life. In essence, he creates different densities, and those cause currents and countercurrents. Evaporation, which is non-existent in the high Arctic regions and very active in equatorial zones, provide a continual exchange of tropical water and polar water. What's more, I've detected in those rising and falling currents that make the ocean continually seem to breathe. I've seen a molecule of salt water heat up to the surface, sink back to the depths, reaching a density of 28 degrees Fahrenheit, then cool off, grow lighter, and rise again. At the poles, you'll note the consequence of this phenomenon, and thanks to this law of far-seeing nature, you'll understand why water can freeze only at the surface." As the captain finished the sentence, I said to myself, "The pole! This daredevil is claiming he'll even go to that location." Meanwhile, the captain fell silent and looked into the liquid element he'd studied so thoroughly and unceasingly. Then, going on, "Salts," he said, "fill the ocean in considerable quantities, Professor, and if you removed every dissolved grain, you could create a mass totaling some 28 million cubic miles, which, if spread out throughout the globe, would form a layer nearly 35 feet thick. Don't assume that the presence of these salts is simply due to some whim of nature. Hardly. Salt makes the seawater less vulnerable to evaporation and keeps the wind from carrying off excess amounts of steam, which on condensing would flood the temperate zones. Salts play a leading role, the role of stabilizing force in overall management of our planet." Captain Nemo stopped, straightened up, and took a few steps down the platform. Then he came back to me. "As for those billions of tiny animals," he went on, "those infusoria that live by the million in one droplet of water, 20 billion of which barely weigh an ounce, their role is equally important. They consume the salt in the sea. They assimilate the solid element of the water, and since they produce coral and madrepores, they're actual creatures of limestone continents. And then, once they are deprived from the water its mineral nutrient, the droplet gets lighter, rises to the surface. There it consumes more salt left behind by the original evaporation, gets heavier, sinks again, and brings those tiny animals new elements to consume. Ergo, those two currents, rising and falling, continually moving and continually alive. More intense than on land, more plentiful, more infinite, this energy flourishes in every part of the ocean, a fatal element for man. It's said, but the vital element for a myriad of creatures, and for me." When Captain Nemo spoke this way, he was transformed, and he aroused extraordinary feelings in me. "Out there is the true existence," he added, "and I can envision the founding of nautical towns, clusters of underwater homes, which, like the Nautilus, would come back to the surface of the sea to breathe each morning. Free towns, if ever there were, independent cities. Then again, who knows if some tyrant—" Captain Nemo finished his sentence with a vehement gesture. Then instantly he began to speak to me as though to drive away an ugly thought. "Professor Aronow," he asked me, "do you know how deep the ocean is?" "I only know, Captain, what the major soundings have told us." "Could you quote them then, so I can double check them if need be?" "Here's a few that stick in my memory," I replied. "If I'm not mistaken, the average depth is 27,000 feet and is found in the North Atlantic, 82,000 feet in the Mediterranean. The most remarkable soundings were taken in the South Atlantic, near the 35th parallel, and they gave 39,000 feet. All that is an estimate that the whole sea bottom were to made level, its average depth would be about 4.5 miles. Well, Professor, Captain Nemo replied, I'm in hopes of showing you something better than that. As for the average depth of this part of the Pacific, I'll have to tell you it's only 13,000 feet. With that, Captain Nemo headed to the hatch and vanished into the ladder. I followed him and went back to the main lounge. The propeller instantly started turning, and the log showed us at a speed at 20 miles per hour. Over the ensuing days and weeks, Captain Nemo was very frugal with his visits. I saw him only at rare intervals. His chief regularly fixed the positions I found reported on the chart, in such a way that I could plot exactly the Nautilus's course. Conseil and Ned Land spent their long hours with me. Conseil had told his friend about the wonders of our undersea stroll, and the Canadian was sorry that he hadn't gone along. But I had hoped that he would have the chance to visit the oceans forests of Oceania. Hey, Freddie, I want you to think about what we should do on Wednesday, the last day of class. All right, I am open to suggestions. I was gonna do the review that you wanted me to do, but you never showed up the next day. So like, I'll be happy to do that on the last day of class if you like. Almost every day, the panels in our lounge stayed open for a few hours, and our eyes never tired of probing the mysteries of the underwater world. The Nautilus's overall heading was southeast, and it kept at a depth between 300 and 500 feet. But one day, Lord knows on what whim, it did a diagonal dive with the help of its slanting fins, reaching the strata located 65,000 feet underwater. The thermometer gave it a temperature of 40 degrees Fahrenheit, which at this depth seemed to be temperate and common to all latitudes. On November 26th at 3 o'clock in the morning, the Nautilus crossed the Tropic of Cancer at longitude 172 degrees. On the 27th, it passed on the site of the Hawaiian Islands, where the famous Captain Cook met his death on February 14th, 1779. By then, we'd fared 4,860 leagues from our starting point. When I arrived on this platform that morning, I saw the islands of Hawaii, 2 miles to the leeward, and the biggest of the 7 islands to form in this group, and I could clearly make out the tilled soil in the outskirts, the various mountain chains running parallel to the coastline, and its volcanoes with Mauna Kea towering over them, 16,000 feet above sea level. Among other specimens from these waterways, our nets brought up some fan coral from the species Flabellaria pavonia, polyps flattened into graceful shapes characteristic of this part of the sea. The Nautilus kept its southerly heading. On December 1st, it cut the equator at 142 degrees, and on the 4th of the same month, after a swift and uneventful crossing, we raised the Marquesas Island. 3 miles off in latitude 8 degrees by 57 south, longitude 139 west, I spotted Martin Point and Nukuhiva, the chief member of this island group belonging to France. I saw only the wooded mountains outlined in the horizon because Captain Nemo hated hugging the shore. Here our nets brought us some fine fish specimens. Dolphinfish with azure fins, gold tails, meats that was unmatched in the whole world. Wrasse that have almost no scales but are exquisitely tasty. Coachwort cardinalfish with bony jaws. Yellowish frigate mackerel as good as bonito. All fish worth classifying in the ship's pantry. After leaving these delightful islands, to the protection of the French flag, the Nautilus covered about 2,000 miles, from December 4th to the 11th. Its navigating was marked by the encounter of the immense school of squid, unusual mollusks that are related to the cuttlefish. French fishermen nicknamed them the cuckold fish, and they belong to the glass cephalopodia, the branch Dibranchiata, consisting themselves of cuttlefish and argonauts. The naturalists of antiquity had made a special study of them, and these creatures furnished many earthly figures of speech with soapbox orators in the Greek marketplace, as well as excellent dishes for the table of the wealthy citizens, if we're to believe Athenaeus, the Greek physician predating Galen. It was during the night of December 9th to the 10th that the Nautilus met up with the army of the largely nocturnal mollusks. They were numbered in the millions. They were migrating from the temperate zones towards zones still warmer, following the itineraries of herring and sardine. We looked at them through our glass-heavy windows. They swam backwards with tremendous speed, moving along with the help of their propulsion tubes, chasing fish and mollusks, eating the little ones, eaten by the big ones, and tossing around the the indescribable confusion, 10 feet nature which has rooted on their heads like a hairpiece of pneumatic snakes. Despite the speed, the Nautilus navigated for several hours in the midst of the school of creatures, and its nets brought up an incalculable number, among which I identified the 9 that Professor Dioringby had classified as living in the South Pacific Ocean. During the crossing of the sea, continually lavished in the most marvelous sights on us, it was its variety was infinite. It changed its setting and decor with more for the pleasure of our eyes. We were called upon not simply to contemplate the works of our Creator in the midst of the liquid elements, but also to probe the ocean's most alarming mysteries. During the day of December 11th, I was busy reading in the main lounge. Ned Land and Conseil were studying the luminous waters in the gaping panels, but the Nautilus wasn't moving. The ballast tanks were full, and it was sitting at a depth of 33,000 feet in a comparatively unpopulated region of the ocean where only bigger fish put in occasional appearances. Just then I had my nose in a delightful book by John Mosse, The Servants of the Stomach, and while savoring its clever contents, when Conseil interrupted my reading. "Would master kindly come here a second?" he said in an odd voice. "What is it, Conseil?" "It's something master should see." I got up, leaned on my elbows in front of the window, and saw it. In the broad electric daylight, a huge, motionless black shape was hanging in the midst of the waters. I studied it carefully, trying to figure out the nature of this gigantic cetacean. Then a thought suddenly came to mind. "A ship!" "Yes," the Canadian replied. "A disabled craft that's sinking straight down." Ned Land wasn't mistaken. We were in the presence of a ship whose severed shrouds still dangled from the clasps. Its hull seemed to be in good condition, so it must have gone down just a few hours before. Chopped off a couple feet above its deck, 3 wooden stumps indicated the flooding ship had been forced to sacrifice the masts. But it had heeled sideways, filled completely, and was listing to port even yet. It was a sad sight, this carcass lost among the waves, but sadder still was the view on deck, where its lashed ropes kept it from washing overboard, a few corpses that still lay. I counted 4 of them, 4 men, one still standing on the helm. Then a woman, halfway out of the skylight on the after deck, carrying a child in her arms. This woman was young. Under the brilliant light of the Nautilus's ray, I could make out her features, which the water had not yet decomposed. With her last ounce of strength, she lifted the child above her head, and the poor creature still had its arms entwined in its mother's neck. The posture of the 4 seamen seemed to be ghastly to me, contorted from a convulsive movements as if to make one last effort to break loose from the ropes that were tying them to the ship. Then the helmsman alone, calm and his face smooth and solemn, his grizzled hair plastered to his forehead, his hands gripping the wheel, there seemed even yet to be steering the wrecked 3-master through the ocean depths. What a picture! We stood speechless, heart pounding, in front of that shipwreck, caught in the act, photographed in its final moments, as it were. I could already see the enormous sharks, moving in with fiery eyes, drawn by the lure of human flesh. Turning in the meantime, the Nautilus circled the sinking ship, and for a second I could read the stern aboard. The Florida, Sunderland, England. You can see there, sinking ship, sharks coming. Actually, that's it. So we will pick this up tomorrow, second to last day of class, and Wednesday will be our final day. I'm not going to test you guys or anything like that. Thank you guys for coming. Diana, Alfredo, I hope you guys remember to come back, and I'll see you guys then.